So a lot of things are going to have to be changed in the process of voting itself.
Thank you very much. I'd like to shift this over to Michael next.
So just wondering about the global context and just wanting to expound upon.
Yeah, I'd like to see your thoughts on how you feel the global context can actually teach or like educate us in like a new movement or ways to react to situations.
So thank you, Carolina, for bringing up Chile, and I'd like to talk a little bit about Chile as well. I think there's two important things that we can learn by looking outside of the United States, and really looking at both the history and the sort of contemporary struggles that we see. For one, we can learn more about what this enemy is that we're fighting. To understand neoliberalism, we really do need to look at the experiences of countries like Chile, who were 30, 40 years behind in as far as the process of neoliberal reform. But that is what's happening in Chile and what's happened in Chile over the last 30, 40 years. This is the vision that our leaders, both nationally from both political parties, whether you're Democrat or Republican, as well as at the state level, this is the vision that they have for what they want to do here. So we can learn more about the enemy that we're fighting, and then by learning more about the struggles against this, we can learn more about effective struggle. So as far as learning more about who our enemies are, I'm willing to bet a lot of you have heard this term neoliberalism or globalization or free trade. These are terms that often kind of mean the same thing. Sometimes, depending on what term you're using, you're being more specific about exactly what you're identifying here. But just a long story short, essentially what we're talking about is a form of like laissez-faire capitalism that is essentially capitalism. It's pure capitalism. But the ideology behind neoliberalism is this idea that we need to completely eliminate any sort of public education programs, any sort of social welfare programs, anything that is not private or is deemed to be any sort of handout or entitlement, as some people might say. And instead, we need to have a purely private system, economic, political system, where, in the words of one of the great thinkers, he might call himself, Milton Friedman, that there's no such thing as a free lunch, he said, and in fact, if you have any sort of government program or any sort of social welfare program, it is a drag upon this sort of pure vision of the end of history, they might say, where somehow these free markets are going to lead us to greater prosperity for all. It's all a bunch of bullshit, we know that. So I bring Milton Friedman up because, Carolina, you talk about the Chicago boys. And essentially, the Chicago boys, University of Chicago, not only before the coup, but after the coup, were in Chile, post-1973, were intimately involved in the construction of all of the reforms, or deforms, you might say, that were happening in Chile. The media dubbed it the Chilean miracle. Essentially, it was dismantling any sort of education program, social welfare program, getting rid of unions. This seems familiar because we see that this is essentially was the first step in what is going to be a larger process that's going to happen here in Wisconsin, and it's on its way. So yeah, get rid of the unions first, but we know what's coming next. Tuition hikes are going to keep going up. For those of you that are graduate student employees, your tuition remission, that's going to go. We know in Chile that there has been this move to defund public schools and instead to privatize schools. We see that's happening in Wisconsin. We know that's happening. We know that's on the agenda. So everything that we're seeing happening here has already happened, has been tried in Chile. Now, unfortunately for the people of Chile, when Pinochet came in to power, any sort of effective resistance was quashed when people were rounded up and put into prison camps or tortured or exiled or murdered. And we see that oftentimes you need this sort of terror in order to secure the changes that you're hoping to bring about. Because people who are generally awake, paying attention, and organized, as they were in Chile in 1973, that's a real problem. Because they're not going to put up with that kind of shit. But we see here in Wisconsin, while people were in some ways organized and in some ways awake because we saw the massive protests that happened at the square, the Capitol Square, we also see that people weren't willing to take on the extra what's needed to actively and effectively struggle against these reforms. So what do we actually need to do? We need to do what's going on in Chile right now, which is essentially activities that are putting an end to business as usual. So in the last 2 years, we've seen massive student strikes in Chile, occupations of high schools, occupation of colleges, a resurgence in labor movement, and just sort of like an upswell of resistance, which we ultimately need to see here, but I'm very pessimistic and afraid that it's not going to be happening.
Thank you so much. James Block.
Jim, yeah.
Jim.
The burden of my remarks will be around the theme of beyond protest. I want to talk about it in two parts. First of all, why we're having trouble moving beyond protest, and secondly, what it would mean to actually move beyond protest, and to suggest that some conversations need to be engaged in by those on the left with regard to both of those topics that are not being talked about really adequately at all. I think there's a large sense on the blogs and elsewhere that the people on the progressives left sort of preach to each other about things they already know, and that's because I think that there's a kind of comfortable rut that progressives are in, which keeps them from asking the difficult questions. And I want to put the questions I want to put are as difficult as I can imagine. I think if one asked oneself, where's the vision of the left today, one would be hard put to find out even a glimmer. And the question is why? And my argument is very simple, that the right is triumphant, unilateral, hegemonic today, because the left, those on the left, those who are progressives, are afraid of our own dreams. We're afraid of our own vision. We've neutralized ourselves. The enemy is not neoliberalism. The enemy is ourselves. I believe that absolutely firmly. We take comfort in fighting for old causes because we're not clear in our own minds that we want democracy in our own lives, that we want empowerment or would know what to do with it, that we believe in freedom and want autonomy of lives lived freely and at one with ourselves, or that we want selfhood or know what it is or could find it in a dark room at night. The result is that we, as I say, have neutralized ourselves, and we end up fighting for things that were possibly advances in the 1930s. And what we end up is with little more than a holding action. No advance, no mobilizing of the young because there's no future. We offer no future, you can have no movement. This is a society that has winners and losers, that has no democracy, no selfhood. It's a war of all against all. It doesn't offer power. It's the world of the Hunger Games. It's the world of the Hunger Games. We have to see it clearly and decide, are we going to play the game? We might survive. A few of us might survive as others die, or we think about what it means to extricate ourselves. I don't call fighting for a middle-class society where it returns to the status, hyper-acquisitive, hyper-accumulative, lonely, anomic world of the 50s that I grew up in. My vision is not to get everybody part of that. I don't want any part of that. I don't want to fight for anybody to get any part of that. Now, there are things one has to fight for. That's not a vision. I'm not going to tell kids in my classes, what I want for you is you too can be in the suburbs. I don't want any part of it. We have nothing to offer beyond that. We have no notion of a holistic society beyond fight against the things that are going wrong so that you too, we all can be part of that. So what's my first challenge? My first challenge is to distinguish between holding actions and acts of vision and transformation. A holding action is defensive. And don't get confused. The Walker recall was defensive. Obama is defensive. Whatever you thought in the first place. Obama is defensive. Defending the Chicago teachers is defensive. My mother was one of the first organizers of the Chicago Teachers Union in the minority communities. Fighting for the Chicago teachers now is largely defensive. It doesn't mean it shouldn't be done. It's largely defensive. A lot right now is about holding actions. The right sees that the left is on the defensive. It's lost. It has no vision in any one of these categories, which I'll talk about in a second go-round. It's afraid of itself, afraid of its own vision, so it attacks relentlessly and all over the place. It overwhelms, and what you do is, it's like the Italians at Messina. You fight, fall back 10 yards, and dig in again. That's not a vision that's going to convince anybody. It ends up wasting energy, squandering resources, making young people feel that they're going to just further alienate themselves. Sometimes it has to be done. The right knows the future is not theirs. They know that for 700 years, the world's been changing out of their grasp. They believe in 10-year segments, trying to gather what they can. And the left, where is it? The right understands we're in a post-work, post-unlimited growth, post-patriarchal, post-homophobic, post-parental dominant society world, where new forms of pleasure and meaning are emerging that will take place in a less competitive, less atavistic, less hypocritical, less false society. Less standardized, routinized, and punitive society. But what they count on is that the progressives don't know that. The progressives don't have a clue about any of that. They want just use soft noodles instead of hard noodles when you attack, when you punish.
You have about 10 more seconds.
Okay. If we want to talk about unions and all that, that's fine. I think we need to be more aware, last point, about the reactionary forces that are at work. We have to be aware when Hunger Games comes on, that it's a desperately craven image of the world that's very accurate. We have to listen, instead of saying, oh, Katniss, she's great, she's wonderful. All my students say, I want to be Katniss. You're going to fight, Neil, you're going to fight the world with a bow and arrow? Really? Is that what we should do? Get bows and arrows? It's telling us, that movie, and its cravenness, that you got to find other ways out of this game because it's been stacked. Got to move on. But it's our last point. It's our problem. We don't want to move
Your
on.
last point.
We don't want to move on. That's my point.
Great. So, taking a few of the statements into account, especially the statements about a vision or like trying to set forth something new as opposed to this defensive stance that we've taken for a while, it leads one to believe that where our fights are, this chessboard that like, I'll say this in like a metaphor, this chessboard that's laid with pieces and we follow the pieces, maybe what we should be doing is just throwing out the chessboard and not reacting based upon like these like linear sort of battles, these easy to see battles, but finding new battles, new directions. So on that, I want us to discuss the austerity movement. The austerity movements, or like the austerity struggles, I guess would be a better way to put it. The ones in the United States, which, for my personal opinion, are a failure, to the ones that we've seen in London, the ones that we've seen in Chile, and most recently the one in Montreal, which won. We'll start with Michael.
So I don't know if I quite understand the question.
Question is, where do you see us, like, can you make a strong definition between how we responded to austerity measures versus how Montreal responded?
I don't think we really did respond. I think it was I'd like to first start by saying I think I pretty much agree with the comments that Jim is making about this lack of clear vision beyond just these defensive acts, and I think that's a central question. How do we move beyond that? I'm not sure that I have much of an answer other than that we do continue to struggle. We don't necessarily need to throw out all other forms of, or all previous forms of struggle, but I think that the point about having a vision that is not a defensive vision, beyond just the actions, we can take actions that might be tried and true traditional actions, like going on general strike. We don't need to always reinvent the wheel, but we do need to start viewing it as something that we are going to actually have a forward vision. And I think that's an excellent point that he makes here. As far as then what did we do in Wisconsin? Well, the recalls were a horrendous mistake. Essentially, we had a moment in, you see periodically these upswells of grassroots mobilization, generally that are unheard of, like we saw in Wisconsin in 2011. And the way that the institutional left dealt with this was by trying to demobilize this mass movement. What should we have done instead? Well, I think it's so crystal clear, which is one of the things I was really frustrated about at the last, after the recall event, was that clearly the people were out in the streets. Clearly people were willing to do things that would have meant an end to business as usual. Whether that meant going on strike, as far as the unions, going on strike, that for students, occupy your campus more than just, we had an occupation here at UWM, and that's cool and all, but it was symbolic. It was not actually any sort of, it didn't disrupt business as usual. So what should we have done, or what, I'm not sure if I'm really quite answering the question, but I think what we saw happen was, and I think going off of what Jim said, it was this fear, and I think there was this fear among organizations to a large degree, this fear of losing your organization. And instead, the focus should have been pushing the struggle and pushing the agitation as much forward as possible. When I was thinking about this event, one of the books that I was thinking about was a book that I read a long time ago. So if I'm actually representing the positions in this book or not accurately, we'll see. But it's an old book, came out the year I was born, called Poor People's Movements by Francis Fox Piven and Richard Cloward, husband and wife team, sociologists, poli-sci professors, and it's a very comprehensive book, and whatever I would say about it would be a gross oversimplification of one of the many complex points that were made. But one of the interesting things in this book, it analyzed 4 different social justice movements throughout American history, 20th century American history, unemployed workers movements during the Great Depression, the movements to build industrial unionism in the 1930s, civil rights movement, and welfare rights movement. And one of the points that I thought was most salient was this discussion about organizations, and how you see that there are these moments, like in all 4 of these examples, where there's this upswell of participatory grassroots movement, where people are taking action. There's a certain measure of spontaneity. People are taking actions on their own without necessarily being told what to do or how to do it. And out of this sometimes grows organizations, and the point of the book was not to say you don't have organizations, but instead it was partly, one of the points that was made was that these organizations actually at different times became a drag on the movement, and that when the focus became so much on we need to save our organization versus we need to push forward the struggle in order to gain as many concessions as we possibly can at this moment, they play a negative role in the movement. So we saw with the unions and with the social justice organizations, there was this fear: if we go on strike, what's going to happen? Are we going to be sued because technically we're breaking the law? Are we going to lose what little we have? When in essence, they had everything to lose by not taking more direct action. Civil disobedience, a more militant labor movement, and I say that I don't mean violent necessarily. I mean people who are willing to disrupt business as usual, and we don't need to be afraid of losing our organizations, because I believe what's most important is to push forward the struggle as far as possible, understanding that there are these waves of momentum. And so when the wave is cresting, you try to get as much as you can, and kind of see where the chips will fall. So
great. Thank you so much. Just to the panelists, I'm not sure if you can see this. I have your timer sitting right here, so if you look up, it'll always just be there.
Oh my God, terrifying.
I know, time. Gotta destroy that shit. So,
The clock, isn't it? It's the clock.
it's the clock.
It's
This one is
industrial routine. Wow. Do we have to?
This one is going to be for Carolina. So, without the long history of militant struggles that we've seen in Chile and Mexico, how do we mobilize people for, or without like explaining that history, basically, how do we mobilize people for a general anti-capitalist struggle?
Good question, because I have no clue. I actually am puzzled myself of the lack of reaction that people have in this country. I don't know what's going to take for people to go to the streets. As I said, in Chile, something happened, everybody will go to the street. Not knowing the history, I mean, I don't think that you have to know Marx and Lenin and everybody to understand hunger or poverty. For example, with the occupation and the Occupy movement and the RICO, which were mainly white, not offending anybody, but white privilege is a reality. The black people were like, hey, now you're mad and protesting. Well, we don't have jobs forever, and we haven't had schools forever, and our homes have been foreclosed forever. Now you care because it's touching you. So I think that is lack of empathy, education, lack of building community, and I think that's the key. It's true that here we are reacting, usually reacting to whatever's going on, like the recall was and everything. We're not proposing anything. We don't have a vision, as he said. Now, I don't know if there is a left. When he said the left in the US, I'm like, which left? I don't know, because he also progressive, leftist, whatever. It's really weird and I don't know. It's a territory that I do not understand. I mean, in Chile, even now, the other day I said to a friend, I have communist friends, and she's like, oh, you have communist friends? I was like, yeah. I mean, Chile, they run for office, you know, it's like, they're normal people. And so, here too, I know I have communist friends too here, but another time. But here, they're not normal here. I don't know. But I think that in the case of the African community, African American community, it did work though. I mean, the recall, I know I'm going everywhere, and the occupation movement, because if you see, maybe with the white people, they got disappointed and went home and continue with the privilege whining, but black people actually ran for office, a lot of young blood. I mean, even though I'm not saying I support elections and all that, nor I say I don't, but I mean, Ian Vito, Lashandra Bernan, Mohammed Mari, Jason Hargis, but Mandela Barnes, thank you. ATU present. I mean, it did have an effect. I don't know if really we want to play in the chessboard, as you were saying. Sometimes I think that we shouldn't, but then you are like, damn, if Romney, we would fucked up. No, if Obama, we would fucked up a little less, but we fucked up anyway. So it's like, I don't know, and that's the thing, that it's like this system is created in a very intelligent way when you are, okay, RICO, now it's fucking Obama or whatever, and so then it's gonna be another step. So it's like we're always concentrating on what's coming and we cannot build, and I think that really what we need to build is community. We need to build community. Maybe we need to start more clubs like this one. And we need to start gardens, we need to live in communes, go back to knowing each other. Very simple, I'm not religious at all, disclaimer. I'm just saying that as humans, we need to build, because we're not doing that, we don't know each other. Unfortunately, with the black community, well, some organizations came from all this, and but some of them are sort of discriminating you, yeah, you're not dark, whatever, anyway. It doesn't matter. The thing is, we need to move forward, and we need to move forward, we need to have a vision. We cannot continue responding. And I think, even though in Chile it is responding in a way, they also have a clear plan. Like, the recent elections of, well, the teachers union have always been communist. But now the head of all the unions, the one that won like 2 weeks ago, is also a communist woman. And so, it's just different, you know, and I don't know, I think that in everybody here, we need to ask ourselves, what do we fear? Because really, what do we fear? I mean, you know, Chile, or in Chiapas right now, if you go to see what's happening with their communities, which is their autonomous communities, they have autonomy, their own laws, their own schools, their own everything. They're being attacked. So, what would it take? I don't know. I mean, Chile, you know, in Chile there was torture, disappearing. You know, the type of tortures were awful. I mean, you know, electricity and all that kind of good stuff that the School of the Americas teach. And that's the other thing that we need to take into account, I guess, is that we are in the U.S. I hate to say America, something that I hate, because America is a continent, that's what we learn. But in my country. But in the U.S., you know, you are really in the belly of the beast, as the chess says. So yes, it's harder. School of the Americas are the experts in torturing, and you know, I mean, people, they were tortured while pregnant, or they tortured their children just so they would talk, and they were raped by dogs, and things that are beyond things that I can tell you. Yes, I do have PTSD, and but I also have. I don't know if hope is the word, but I think we can create something. And right now, because I struggle with those things of playing in the chessboard or outside, I think that maybe we could do both for the moment. Yeah, if somebody has the answer, hey, tell me.
Jim. So one of the questions that came up here is talking about the Madison uprising as a pre-political reaction without a vision. I believe this is starting to go into your statement. I would like you to talk, you have another 5 minutes to discuss where you think Madison went wrong and whether mass movements are something that you are into or against or maybe believe somewhat.
Thanks. I think we have a lot of ways of trying to avoid the question. Count the ways, they're endless. The questions come back, it seems to be, to us. Going out in the streets, as in 68 in Paris, produces 69 in Paris. It seems to me that a progressive movement that takes responsibility for history and responsibility for society and responsibility for the future has to understand the dynamic of history in its own terms, with a narrative, a story, a future, a process, and that process exists. That's the irony. This process exists. It began to develop, I mean, I'm studying it now throughout the course of American history. It culminates several times, but it clearly culminates in the end of the 1960s. Kenneth Keniston, the great sociologist, writes in one of his major essays, he talks about the two revolutions, and I recommend you're looking at that. He says there are two revolutions. He said the first revolution is the revolution for human rights. It's for basic political, rights of political rights, rights of citizenship, basic right to participate in the economy, to have certain kinds of legal freedoms. That revolution was won in the United States before any other society in the world 200 years ago. A lot of places in the world are still fighting for that, and indeed the U.S. is fighting again for that. So again, there's some comfort that we're fighting again for that. The second revolution, he said, is a revolution that comes on the cusp of post-industrial society. We are in a new economic framework for the first time in human history. The second revolution has never been thought about before. It's never occurred before. It's a revolution in which we ask the question, is it enough to have these formal rights? Or do we want the substance of lives lived within those various sectors of the world, lived in meaningful, communal, autonomous, self-realizing ways? No society has ever put that question before. It's now time to put that once the first revolution has been secured in a particular society. And the answer you find that the young people in the 60s were saying is none of those. That second revolution has not been won anywhere. But the problem is that once you take on that second revolution, as I said, you have to ask some really, really hard questions. What does it mean to live in a post-patriarchal, post-parental family? It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of nurturing. It takes a lot of caring. It takes a lot of give and take. It takes a lot of growing up and growing out and growing fully and growing together. It takes that in schools to rethink the whole education process, to produce realized, engaged young people. It takes a lot of work every day, all the time. Workplaces that are democratic, political processes that are complementary and negotiating and democratic and voices are heard. Those are very difficult things. And psychologically, we have all been produced in a world where we don't trust ourselves in those institutions. We don't trust ourselves to be authentic. We don't trust ourselves to be open. We don't trust ourselves to be able to hear. We don't trust ourselves to be collaborative. We have to learn all those things. We have to learn them with young people who haven't suffered the damage we've suffered before we damage them. Those things are all right here, and they're required by post-industrialism. Why can't we have a full employment economy? Because there's not enough work. That's just obvious. And in a society where work and pay trigger everything else becomes impossible. And the right understands that, so they're taking all the excess money for themselves while they fight, while they get rid of all the excess labor. And it's going to get worse and worse and worse. That doesn't mean there aren't a lot of good kinds of collaborative and empowering and humanly realizing jobs to be done. There's a lot of it. But it doesn't require a full employment economy. 90% of the society is in absolutely meaningless work. We have to face that. The Port-Huron statement says that. 50 years ago now, says exactly that. The vision is there. How much are we willing to become the people who defend and live that vision? And if we don't live it, who are we going to convince that it's the right way to go? We'll continue talking about employment strikes. We have a future, and it's there. It's been there. It's been there since the Grundrisse in Marx.
Final points.
Final points. Let's talk about, A, why we have trouble facing up to this world in ourselves, in very personal ways, and then how we take steps to engage in transformative acts every single day. You can't go to sleep at night if you haven't engaged in one transformative act. That's my absolute rule.
Thank you so much. That was great. I have two questions that came in that are of a similar vein. The one is pointed specifically at Michael, so we'll start there. For Michael, how do we expand these conversations beyond leftist bars and institutions?
That's a great question.
Free beer, free beer.
I wish I knew I don't have like a blueprint for how to do this. It's obvious that it needs to be done. I think that part of the problem I see happening, even within, like we talked about Riverwest, this sort of, this Riverwest itself has a lot of cool things going on, but it's got this really insular vision in a lot of ways. One of the big critiques I have of what's going on in Riverwest is this Riverwest branding. We wanted, I was at an event here a few weeks ago, a night school event, where people were talking about making Riverwest this sort of self-sufficient community, this sort of like, this thing on its own that can exist without the rest of the world. And in essence, the things that we're talking about, the struggles that we're talking about, these are global forces. And it obviously needs to move beyond any community. It needs to move beyond even a local context. So how do we move our discussion beyond leftist circles and bars? I don't know. I mean, there's lots. It depends on what do you do. Like, I can't answer that question for every single person who's out there. I don't know who you all are or what you're involved in. As far as like my own personal, like what I have done. Like I said, I was involved I was a high school teacher in the South Side for 6 years, trying to be involved in not only in playing a role in the lives of the students that I worked with, but also the communities that they lived in, that they were part of, being involved with organizations that were beyond this community, like Voces de la Frontera and other groups. The part of the thing is that it's not on us to preach, to proselytize our message, our answers to other communities, but we may need to link up with other communities. Like, I don't really feel comfortable saying, how are we in Riverwest going to move our answers beyond Riverwest? Because in fact, other communities have answers. They themselves have to be part of that. And I think, kind of to dovetail into like some of Jim's comments about transformative acts every single day, and having these sort of broader visions. I think these are things that need to be. They're not something that you can tell somebody to do. This is a lived experience that people actually have themselves. And so, I don't know, I think the answer is that we link up with other communities, that we have these discussions with other communities, but not at other communities, or not this idea of we're going to preach to another community, but instead, what do people in other parts of Milwaukee, what do people involved in other struggles, or who have maybe a different focus in their activism, whatever you say about that word, which has some problems too. I mean, just kind of go into this idea: are we activists, or is this something that we generalize to our everyday lives? Like, we need to move beyond just activists who are putting shouldering all of the weight of all the world's problems, but instead have actively engaged communities. I don't have a single answer for that, other than just to say that it needs to be a more horizontal, engaged dialogue between these communities. If you look at what's happened with the, currently you're talking about the Occupy, and we've got the Occupy the Hood, and the Decolonize the Barrio, and all this stuff. There wasn't white, young, progressive, whatever, radical, or whatever you want to say, activists who were going into the north side or the south side and telling people what they needed to do. These discussions were already happening in these communities, so we need to be part of that discussion, but not leading that discussion.
Can I just add one sentence from a paper that a student of mine wrote for the last term?
Yeah, actually, we'll start here. I'm also, just a heads up.
Just add to Michael's.
Yeah, totally. 3 minutes.
Yeah.
For
No, this is
right
one
now.
sentence. He says, what can you do? He says, community gardening and urban agriculture, opening our homes to people experiencing homelessness, potlucks, farmers markets, teach-ins and skill-sharing workshops, neighborhood beautification and community cleanup, dumpster diving, freeganism, time banking, really free markets and swap meets, hitchhiking and freight hopping, couch surfing, independent publishing organizations and media groups, poetry slams, organizing boycotts, various direct actions, squatting foreclosed homes, free yoga and meditation classes, graffiti and guerrilla art, and many, many other amazing things.
Where's he?
Yeah, thank you. Actually,
He's busy!
if you have just an answer, just say an answer. Like, some of the questions are actually asking for the most clear answer that you can say, so go for it. That was actually really great as some ideas of how to move beyond these communities.
I want to add to that. I think that we're all advocates and we're all activists, regardless of what we do. I think that's how I see myself, how I define myself, regardless of my job or my position or where I am. Yes, it's true. When we went to Occupy the Hood, when we went to the 20th Street corridor, we went to ask the people, what do you want to do? They're saying, okay, the garbage is a problem. All right, let's do cleanups together, and then we start talking about stuff. I completely agree with you. I don't think that we need to come with the solutions that they have. Theater usually it's a good way of organizing in the South Side with the Latinos. So I do Theater of the Oppressed. Theater of the Oppressed is an interactive type of theater that doesn't give answers. It started like theater. This guy, Augusto Wall from Brazil, very short, I'm going to explain a little how did he come to it. He was doing theater, community theater in Peru, and in one part in this little town, he comes with big machetes and saying, let's go, let's destroy everything, and yeah. And so the people in this town, people that usually never see theater, they think that theater is real. So they say, yes, let's go, let's do it, I have this and I have that. And so Augusto Wall was saying, no, this is theater. These are not real, these are props. So the people were super upset and saying, oh, so you're gonna fuck with me? I mean, you're coming here trying to trick me or something? So then he created the second phase, which was a theater that the audience could shout out, it was an oppressor and an oppressed, and the audience could shout out ideas of what the oppressed could do. But at the end, someone in the audience was like, I don't mean that, I don't mean that. So what Walt said is, why don't you come to the stage? And since then, the theater has been like that. You present a problem, and then the spectators, who is the audience, raise their hand when they think the oppressed could have done something different, and then they take the stage. So it's a way to look for answers together, because we don't have all the answers, and we cannot go preach to the different communities around. We cannot do that.
Thank you so much. I think that was a great response. Experimentation, in my mind, is something that's lost in our group of, I don't know, like-minded individuals. So, on that note of experimentation, I think it's important to really focus on ideas or visions, thoughts that you had that maybe would do something or maybe would fail. But what's important is that there is something happening, a reaching out after something new, a new truth maybe. So, this is for Michael again. All movements must interrupt business as usual. What are some actual focal points of infrastructure that must blockade or must be blockaded?
Some focal points of infrastructure that must be blockaded. I'm not sure if I quite understand what that particularly means, but I think kind of that, what business do we need to disrupt? I mean, is that what we're saying? What do we need to, it depends on where you are and what you're doing. If you're a university student, you need to disrupt the university. You need to be part of a, whether you're doing a student strike or whether you're doing something that's, you know, some unknown, creative, you know, artistic, whatever you want to do, fine, but you've got to be where you are at. If you are somebody who is facing an eviction, or you're being, your house is being foreclosed, well, that's what you need to disrupt. I mean, going back to that Francis Fox Piven and Cloward book, one of the activities they talked a lot about in that book was the movements to basically eviction and foreclosure, really eviction protests that were, in essence, massive shows of force. 500,000 people would show up and say, actually, Sheriff, you are not going to evict this person. We see some of that happening in different parts of the country here. So where are you at? What are you doing? That's what you need to be part of to disrupt. It's not enough to just simply say, you know, I mean, I know that the role that I have often played has been as this sort of middle class activist type who's going to come in and act in solidarity with people. And the reason why I played that role is because in a lot of ways I come from a very privileged background, in a position, educated, college-educated university student or hanger-on, and so these are the movements that I want to be part of. Yeah, that's cool and all for me, but that's not the way to bring about a massive change, fundamental change to class-based, race-based, or gender inequalities or disparities and all that. It's going to take people actually protesting where they're at, doing what, not just protesting, move beyond symbolic protest, but disrupting where they're at. What are they part of? So I don't know if that's enough of an answer.
In death row, inmates in Texas and the Polanski unit, they do sittings to use the use of force because they have no contact with humans. They cannot touch anyone, and they're 23 hours a day in a prison cell, and 1 hour they are in recreation in a bigger cage. So they are completely isolated all the time, and so in order to organize and to get their message outside, what they do is that they do not obey. They sit in at the time that it's gonna be shift change, so that the officers don't have to go out. And the law says that use of force, you have to film it. And so because it's filmed, then the relatives can get those tapes, and that's the way they do a sit-in. They get gas very close, so they burn their skin and everything. They get beaten, but while that's happening, they are screaming the treatment that they're having. Some they do it in spoken word, and that's the way that their message is getting out. They're disrupting in a very extreme way at the place that they're at.
Chip, any thoughts?
I propose two things here. Again, I'm happy to be on a different track here, that's fine. First of all, I think the first thing that we have to do, the prerequisite to all of this, is to work on ourselves, to become the fitting and realized proponents of the things that we want to happen in the world. As Randolph Bourne, the great American writer and radical, said in the 1910s, if you become the person who lives the dreams that you want to live, you can live in the world to come before that world comes about. You can live with those who share the dream with you. You can live with those who are working on it. You can already reap the benefits of that world to come. And at the same time, work to convince other people, help to show other people, not convince them, but it's not an argument, to show them that that world exists right now. It seems to me that that's the way social change happens. It happens through that kind of slow building of momentum. And it seems to me that it's time to start. So that involves working on ourselves. And then the second part of Bourne's analysis is to act, to engage in acts of transformative empowerment, to create liberated spaces, institutions, families, communities, schools, workplaces, towns in Wisconsin. Some of these abandoned schools. Let's do what the Amish did. I mean, for God's sakes. I mean, take over towns and create all living realities of the kinds of worlds that we want. My view is very clear. The United States is a very, very great, overgrown, hollow tree. It's been hollow for a very long time, which is why the right is so virulent, because they know there's nothing holding it up. The only thing they can do is push away the people who would attack it, because it'll go right over. It can only go over, though, if there's something to replace it. We need to have something. We need to be building it. We need to be thinking about it, processing it, building it together, something to replace it, or it will not disappear. We will all become Stockholm, survivors, Stockholm syndrome. That's where we are. And I just think, I don't want any part of that. There's no part of me that's part of that. In the end, if we're able to do that, the young people, many young people will join us. Socrates in an empire was executed for convincing young people that the world they lived in stunk. Young people will take the risks. A lot of people will take the risks. We have to make the first move. We have to affirm and produce the beginnings of a world that makes sense. Otherwise, we're just part of the machine to be ground up.
Thank you so much. So organizations are often a barrier to getting organized. We can start from this assumption. Am I correct, panelists? All three of you? How can we get organized as a force without them? Start with Carolina.
Without organizations?
Without organizations.
Well, I think organizations are a barrier because, for example, I don't know if we're talking about the same thing, whomever wrote that, but for example, non-profits are very tight in their hands because so they cannot do much because you get funding, then you have to comply with certain things. Then unions like teachers union don't have a right to strike, which is bizarre because if you don't have that right, how can you negotiate? And then another unions that have thought about it, I don't think that their base is on support. So I can think about Chile again. Thank you. The young anarchists in Chile, they're the Ocupas. They occupy these houses that are empty, and they start right away creating like cultural centers and all kinds of workshops and that kind of thing. And then when they're evicted, they move to another empty house and they start all over. And I think that we have to organize outside, obviously. I mean, like with people taking the risk, with people that maybe don't look like us, take the risk to meet each other. One thing that concerns me though is that usually when we talk about organizing all that, again, it's like the white thing that comes to mind to me. And I think that we need to go to the neighborhoods and we need to work with the people where they're at. I hate the thing education and all that because I think that we learn from each other. But there are things that we could start doing, just with group of friends. I mean, for example, how to navigate the justice system. I mean, I think that everybody would benefit by learning that kind of thing. I used to organize in the South Side, bring a judge that was a personal friend of mine, just because I decided he was going to be my friend. And so take him to the South Side and help him with the people that were undocumented and they had a lot of tickets. I think that we need to create spaces where we can, network and work with people that, that we can transform what's going on right now. But we don't need really organization. We actually need to stop thinking about that. It's like in here, the only way that people think that they can organize is through a union. That's not true. I mean, the first thing is, we're gonna do this, okay, let's create an organization. How are we gonna call it? And we get so wrapped up in the name and in the vision and in the mission and all that kind of thing that we never move because we can never agree on the freaking name of it. Those things are not important to me, at least. To me, it's like, I don't care, like even if my name is in it, let's do something. Let's go there. Let's try to create resources. I used to work in the South Side, and I work as a social worker because of politics being so important in my life. Theater, really, the regular theater didn't give me that, so I decided to go a different route. But I created an alternative system in the South Side because there were a lot of undocumented people that were homeless, or they couldn't get, food stamps and all that kind of thing, which anyway is a trap. I think it's a trap. But, and so I had to create alternative support. Talk to people in churches, talk to neighbors, and create this, okay, I have a bed for that person if they need to. All right, to someone, okay, we can give them food if they do this for us. Sort of a time banking idea that he was mentioning in the paper. We have to work outside these systems because they are regulated to oppress us. And as I was saying, for example, with the black community that depends on all these systems, W-2, $600 and something monthly, regardless of how many kids you have. Food shares, WIC, and you have to do this and this and this. You're so tied that you can never move out of that bubble of dependency, and that's by design. So then we have the check catching place here and the liquor store here. It's all by design. So all those are traps, so we need to work outside those systems.
So I'd like to reframe the question a little, or to kind of frame the answer a little bit differently. Yeah, organizations can definitely be barriers to moving forward the struggle. But how can we move on without organization? I'm not so sure that we move forward, that we organize without organization, but that we rethink what it means to have an organization or what the purpose of an organization is. So that the purpose of the struggle, the activity that we take, is not to maintain the organization or to build the organization, but instead to think of organization as those people who are involved in the organization. They are the organization. The purpose of the organization is to find some structure within which they can act in concert together to accomplish the goals that they want to accomplish. So it's not so much that we say organizations are the problem, we get rid of organizations, but instead we kind of rethink. If we're talking about unions, is the purpose of the union to just build more density of members within a certain market? Because that seems to be what our major unions are doing. Their purpose is to get more people into their union. Instead, the purpose of the union, you should rethink of the union. What is the union? The union is the workers themselves organized, actively working together to accomplish the goals that they want to accomplish. If the actual organization, if the formal structure is to be crushed with whatever action you take because of the lawsuit and because of bankruptcy or whatnot, so be it. Your organization is you and the people you're working with. So if the formal structure is lost, fine. The purpose should not be to maintain the organization, but the organizations can play an important role. if we're looking at, like, for example, the Palermo's Workers Union, they have depended in large part upon the organized, basically Voces de la Frontera has been there as an organization that has resources, it has staff, it has a lot of name recognition, so you can depend upon these institutions to aid, but the Palermo's Workers Union is the workers themselves. It's not the steel workers, the United Food and Commercial Workers, whoever's trying to come in and swoop in and basically say, we want to now be the organization. It's the workers though. The union is the workers themselves. If they're going to accomplish anything, if an organization is going to accomplish anything, it means that the people who are involved in the organization have to be participating and part of that. So we need to rethink of what is an organization and not be so caught up on maintaining the organization at all costs.
Can I add something about the Palermo thing?
Sure.
Just to explain. Palermo workers have been working with Soza, but also have been working with the steel workers for like 4 years. Because the steel workers are the ones that they reach out to in order to get support. Unfortunately, when they were ready to vote and the majority went to the union, the food workers union came in and said, that's my territory, you cannot, do that. And so they stopped the voting and the process of getting to the union. Now, when we're talking about unions and organization and all that, I'm also thinking about them personally because I know them personally, and how they are going hungry, how they don't have diapers or formula. So it's complicated for me to, like, there's a cost, and I think that these workers are super brave, and I admire them because many are undocumented, they have nothing, but they're risking it all, and that's something that we don't see in the general population. So we have some lessons to learn.
Can I say one thing
Thank
about
you.
the Palermo's real quick?
I actually want to move topics.
Okay, but if you're at all interested in the Palermo's Workers Union, there's actually a sign-up sheet. If you want to hold it up in the middle table back there, it's just informational. If you want more info, or if you want to get updates, go on over there and sign up, and you can actually be on their email listserv and their phone call. They'll let you know about any upcoming events and stuff that's going on.
Right.
Because we have people applauding, so you should definitely be involved.
Thank you. So we're going to move to 1-minute answers. I have 2 questions up here that would be subject to debate, I'm assuming, or may cause like a small amount of controversy. And past that, I want to move over to a group discussion where I'll be inviting people to come up to the mic and ask questions. So, we'll start with Jim. Why limit our utopian vision to co-ops and other forms of more democratic wage labor?
Am I being accused of that?
No, that's the question for you though.
Yeah, exactly. Why?
Perfect. That's an amazing answer, actually. Great. Now for the group I have, for the full panel, is hostility against the police, and then I'm assuming state and capitalism, de-arresting, black bloc tactics, riots, a productive political force? We'll start with Michael. 1 minute.
Wait, what am I at? Or should we be hostile to the police? Absolutely. Yes, the police play an incredibly destructive role in our communities, and they should be opposed in all manner. Don't ever call the police. It's only gonna make matters worse. And it's especially here in Milwaukee, and I'm incensed at, we talked about getting local people elected. I'm incensed at some of our local leaders who supposedly are some sort of progressive whatnot. Even the person who's the alderman who represents this area. We get a report in the last December or something. There was a report in the Journal Sentinel about you're 7 times more likely to be pulled over if you're an African American in the city of Milwaukee. And what is the statement that Kovac and Mayor Barrett make? They say, "Oh, it can't be racial profiling. It's just because the police are patrolling in high crime areas." When in fact the data shows that you're more likely to be pulled over if you're black or Hispanic in a white neighborhood. So the police we should not respect the police. We should have nothing to do with them. They only play a negative role in our communities. Woo!
I agree. I totally agree. So it's not gonna be a lot of discussion on this, I guess. Definitely. I mean, some years ago, I had 2 teenagers, and I moved to Sherwood because I didn't find a high school that was up to what I wanted. And so I went to Sherwood, and I can tell